Y'all are so sweet. My name is Nancy Douyon, and I'm so excited to speak to all of you today. I am a design ethicist, and I'm also a product philosopher. My past was as a human factors engineer and UX researcher and designer at companies that you may recognize, like Google, Uber, Cisco, IBM, Intel. I've worked on a lot of different projects and consulted for a lot of different projects. Today, I now run a responsible innovation firm where I focus on mitigating harm and hopefully preventing harm as we think about how our unconscious bias design from a westernized standpoint expands across the world. I've been able to work with products in over 120 countries, and I've been able to also help a lot of companies think really responsibly about how to make sure they're not harming people when they design. So, as you can see from today's topic, we're gonna be talking about responsible innovation, but we're gonna be talking about some crises. So you guys are gonna hear a few random, entertaining stories they may seemingly be very random, but we'll hopefully pull some lessons from there. So this is going to be a presentation on cautionary tales. And we understand that everybody makes mistakes, but oftentimes there are warning signs, and then there's things that cloud those warnings. And so we're gonna share some lessons today that we can all take with us so that we can make sure that we're continuing to build trust in our own organizations. And my goal today is to encourage all of you to really think about the potential downsides to what you may be building or what you may be interacting with so that we can make sure that we're building things hopefully a little bit more inclusively. Usually when I kick off my presentations, I like to tell a little bit about myself. So if you guys don't mind, I am from a place called Okai, Haiti, or they pronounce it Haiti in America. Yeah, there's a Haitian in the crowd, so that's awesome. Yes, so for those of you who may not know, Haiti is like nestled between Cuba, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. And Haiti has 11 states. A lot of folks don't know that. Everyone usually knows Port-au-Prince. And what's really cool about it is there's a lot of interesting different cultures around. It's about the size of New Jersey, if you think about it. But I like to show people where I grew up just because I love to see people's reactions. This is the home that we grew up in. My grandmother had 16 kids, one boy, all girls. And a lot of times when I show people this home, people have a visceral reaction to it. One of the things I often hear is, wow, Nancy, you grew up in a hut? I don't even know the translation for the word hut in my language, right? I've never heard of it, but you can also tell from the word hut, it insinuates a lot of things, right? And so I ask people, what is it that's wrong with this design that you would make better? Because there's clearly something wrong with it, right? If you're reacting that way. And they'll say to me wow, we'd probably give it a proper roof, maybe some electricity. And then sometimes they'll even say things like, damn, Nancy, is that chicken the only meal you have for the year? And so when I start to give them a little bit more context, it's interesting how people start to react a little differently to these things. I tell them that roof, which exists in Laos and the Philippines, it's existed for generations. The reason this technology is still being used today is because it acts as an air conditioning system. And when westernized societies came into Haiti and modernized them with a flat roof, they essentially created ovens, right? That front yard grows watermelons. That is not the only chicken that we eat, And there's a lot of other interesting things, but more interesting when I show people, see that wall over on the left? Behind that wall is the beach. And for some reason, when I show people a more expanded view of the perspective that I have, all of a sudden I live in a beach cabana, right? When can I visit it? And so it's really interesting how adding more context makes you have a little bit of a different experience. I mean, maybe some of you might want to visit me in this place and see how we're living, how we're eating, how we're doing things. And so what's really important here is to understand that even with you guys starting off, you saw that home, I'm sure you felt kind of bad for me, right? You probably were filling out a lot of empathy. And it's really important for me to explain to a lot of folks that empathy has become a bit of a buzzword that just doesn't go far enough. When you think about empathy, and I'm gonna give you guys an example, right? If I told y'all I was having a baby, I'm not pregnant, but let's say I was having a baby and I decided all of you are gonna be the godparents. And I said, the only thing I want as a gift is for you to help me design this mobile, right? So you might think, all right, Nancy's having a baby boy, we'll put some toy cars on there, some airplanes, maybe some shapes, maybe some stuffed animals. You're really, really being considerate. You're really, really thinking about the experience that, this child will have. But somehow, even with all that empathy, the perspective that the child sees are wheels, right? The bottom of the triangles and the bottom of the stuffed animals. What happened that you cared so much about the experience that this child was gonna have that you still missed some of the perspective? Oftentimes with products, this is something that we experience too. We are the folks who are in charge of like seeing how the world really is, but sometimes things slip through the cracks. And so, we're gonna go into understanding why some folks think they're applying empathy, but really what they're ending up doing is kind of providing or bringing in a charity mindset and defining how the world should be and then launching. So with that, let's go into some crises, right? How about the FTX collapse? Now, yeah, a lot of y'all know about that, right? Huge failure, right? It was a wake-up call in the idea of investing and trust, right? FTX was a $32 billion company. Cryptocurrency exchange where buyers and sellers could exchange cryptocurrencies, but overnight on November 11th, 2022, it basically vanished and it shook up investors and the confidence in crypto. And so a lot of things were impacted by that. And when you think about these like privately held companies and the level of risk that you're going to take with them, the reward, of course, is much bigger, but that means that the corresponding level of due diligence should also be much higher when these things kind of occur. So we want to make sure that if you're going to be working with investors, you want to highlight to investors that these private market transactions typically don't have the safeguards that the FDIC insurance may have, because DeFi lacks traditional safeguards that makes us trust these accounts. And what's interesting about this is that you're not going through this regulatory scrutiny from the SEC. So when you're not a publicly traded company, you don't have to report, quarterly earnings or get audited financials or have transparency about what's going on. But if you knew your history, the reason these places, the FDIC and the SEC was created was to make sure things like this don't happen, right? And so it's really important as we start to think about what causes these collapses or why we might invest, that there's an understanding that if there's a high reward, oftentimes you need to do more due diligence. And reminders of your history. How about the Twitter blue check mark, huh? So what's so funny about this? I pitched for this talk. I applied for it, and this was last year when the blue check mark incident happened, and I thought it was gonna be over. And then last week, here we are back again, And so it's really interesting. So basically, Elon Musk became CEO of Twitter, and he decided that stripping verification symbols from these celebrities and media personalities, and basically everybody, politicians, that it was something that people should pay for. The company's struggling, we gotta lay off all these people, we need to make money, so let's just define what the world needs. They wanna be validated, we'll charge them for it, right? So in 2009, this is when badges were first introduced because they wanted to coax celebrities and brands into getting on their platform and hopefully getting a little bit of an ego boost, But of course, in November 2022, this is when everything started kind of going downhill. If you guys remember when they actually launched this thing, do you guys remember when Eli Lilly, a verified imposter, stated that insulin was free? Do you guys remember that? Do you know what happened as a result of that? Well, Eli responded that this is not true and apologized for the misinformation from this fake account. And then another fake account apologized for the apology that Eli did and said, no, that's not true. We are absolutely. So it caused chaos, right? In fact, their stocks went heavily down all because of these impersonations and these safeguards that weren't put in place. There was other incidents that happened. Maybe you know about the fact that the fake Nintendo account that was verified had Mario flipping people off. Maybe you saw that the Pope, John Paul, was having an argument with Martin Luther King's account and sharing conspiracy theories with him. And maybe you even heard that LeBron said he was requesting a trade, all from these verified accounts. You would think that we had learned something back then in 2022, so far, far away, right? But just last week, there was a verified account from a Sudanese army official, which was not an actual true story, but it was stating, a false report of the death of a military leader. And many of you might know that there's a war going on in Sudan. So that post had 1 million views before it was taken down. Can you imagine? So, this is just a reminder that Twitter did know after that first incident that they needed to create safeguards, but apparently they still have some work to do on this. Let's talk about Germany. I spent a lot of time in Europe doing a lot of interesting projects, and so it's just really intriguing to me how some new laws occur and some laws that I feel should be around should come in. Many of you probably, or maybe you do or don't know what gender neutrality is. Have you heard of gender neutrality? Well, it's this idea that, words should not have gender. And so German nouns actually, when I was working with folks in Germany, they actually do gender their nouns. And in fact, if the word is plural, like in many other places, it's usually used in the male sense. But in 2018, Germany passed a law that stated that all official documents certificates and passports must include additional gender options, male, female, and diverse. So gender neutrality is less about making a change in the world, and it's more about accepting the realities of the world. Society is not only made up of men and women, but there's intersex and non-binary people too, and that language can reflect it. Otherwise, you're marginalizing people. I spent some time in Zurich, and I also noticed when I was in Zurich, this is Switzerland, that I felt a little uncomfortable. I've been there a couple of times, and I'm like, what is going on here? There's something weird, just a little strange about this place. And as I started digging into the history of Zurich, did you guys know that women didn't start voting in Switzerland until 1971? Further, did you not know that women didn't actually have legal rights, full federal legal rights to vote till 1990? Imagine what that experience must be as a woman in this place, how people are reacting to it because they're that delayed. And believe me when I tell you, I felt it as a woman. I heard the kinds of comments people made. I've heard lots of things about alpha male, this and that. And again, that is not the reality of the situation. And so it's really important that we have to see the world for what it really is and making sure that we're including inclusive language. Further, there are places where they actually create laws that actually make us go backwards sometimes. Did you guys know in Brazil it's federally against the law to be racist? Just for context, I told you guys I'm from Haiti. Haiti freed themselves from slavery in 1804. America ended slavery in 1865. Brazil ended slavery in 1889. It's federally against the law to be racist, but no one has ever been arrested for racism. Really interesting. Does that mean they just decided, you know what, there's a law, so we're just gonna stop being racist, right? Same thing France decided as well. They have a law in France that says that race is not a thing. So we're not gonna call it out, you can't bring it up at all. How can you design inclusively if you can't even see the reality that's going on in front of you? And so when I'm working on projects in France, I could get in legal trouble for bringing up race, even though race is actually a problem. It causes issues. It's really interesting. You guys remember Joe Rogan? Do you guys remember his little snafu last year? He had a few, it wasn't really him per se. There were some misleading claims by a Dr. Robert Malone, who was a virologist, and he said he was the architect of mRNA technology. And he made some claims about the vaccine that were counter to what public health was saying, and it caused a fiasco. Literally, stocks went down for Spotify. Celebrities started to pull off the platform. And Spotify made a statement that they are working to add content advisory to podcasts in every episode, so you actually know that maybe this is the opinion of someone. This is not to be taken seriously, but a lot of people do take these things seriously. In fact, when I was working at Google and we were working on YouTube for Kids, we learned just working with the kids that there were actually quite a few concerns for YouTube using with children. And as a result, we started to really, truly understand why these advisories are put on things so parents know, warning, if your kid goes down this aisle, it may not get so, I don't know, what's a good movie? It may not be so Shrek anymore. Facebook. I want to end on this note with this project, and then we're going to move on to some other things. But Facebook is an interesting one. I was an advisor for Facebook's responsible innovation for the last couple years. I should tell you, technically, I'm still an advisor for Facebook's responsible innovation, but they kind of wiped out the team in November. Remember the layoffs? So I'm like, who do I call? So I was working with this team, and then they just cut the entire innovation team. But the reason the team was even created was, a little thing called Cambridge Analytica happened, nothing big. And of course, there were some other things that happened you may not know about, like there was repeated violations in the state of Washington with the political ad laws there. There was a $400 million penalty in Ireland because they were violating privacy for children. There was even a code injection to circumvent the new policy with Apple doing the app tracking so that they could still kind of learn information and still sell to you. So as a result of that, they created this team to try to be more responsible. It was about 24 engineers. And what was so great about working with this group is we worked with civil rights leaders, we worked with ethicists, we worked with academics, all to try to get an understanding before we launched what things some of these products we were working on were going to, what kind of impact. So by creating those panels, they really helped us create better products. But further, now that they're gone, they're focused on more issue-related teams. So if there's an issue, they've worked on that. I would say that you probably should have a responsible innovation team, but for now, since the team is gone, they're trying to focus on the issues as they go along. But I strongly recommend that we think about using panels when we're doing presentations. So what does all this mean? Like, how the hell is all this happening? And it comes from a really uncomfortable term called bias, right? And you should know that bias isn't always based in conscious reasoning. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, but your brain is like a computer operating system, and your conscious mind processes things at 70 bits per minute. Maybe you don't know what a bit is, okay? What if I told you your non-conscious mind processes things at 11.2 million bits per minute? That means you are spilling all types of crap out, right? And you don't even know that you're doing it, and those things are coming from your upbringing. They're coming from like the things, people you interact with. I'll give you a great example. I went to India and I asked a bunch of people, can I wear a sari? And they were like, yeah, girl, go ahead, get your, it's fine. So I went to the shop, there was a language barrier, but I told them, get me that Beyonce sari. You know what I'm talking about? Give me that Beyonce. So, we went to the back, got some great, great material. I got it made in 2 days, and I was in the farmers markets looking good as hell and posing, because I know everyone was staring at me because I looked good, okay? I looked good. My friend runs up to me and goes, oh my God, Nancy, what are you wearing? And I'm like, I swear to God, I asked like multiple people. They told me it was cool, and she's like, Nancy, you're wearing a wedding dress. I had no idea that the color red implied more wedding colors, and so I just look like a runaway hungry bride in this marketplace, But the reason I didn't know that is because I was, the environment that I'm in is what I'm processing, right? I wouldn't know in India that white is a funeral color, right? I wouldn't know that I was wearing a wedding dress. And it's important for us to know that there's some things we just don't know, right? Because our brains are processing things automatically and they pattern match. And pattern matching is actually good. When you do good at pattern matching, you actually end up making more money, you have better health. But unfortunately, sometimes when it works to help with our decision making and it's a survival mechanism, sometimes bad things end up happening. And so what happens is while our brain is trying to function really efficiently from practicing things over and over again, sometimes this pattern matching, because it's moving so quickly, right? It ends up being unconscious bias. It is unconscious bias. And it's important for us to understand that all of us have unconscious bias. I just told you, you don't even know it. 11.2 billion bits per minute is happening. You have no idea what's happening. And so the way to get around that is you have to slow down, right? You have to slow down your thinking. You have to be aware of these things. I remember when I was studying human factors engineering, when I was working on my PhD, they had told me that, for those of you who don't really know, you can manipulate somebody's behavior by understanding their psychology and the things around them. And I was told that if you want people to lower their voice, like you guys aren't speaking too much right now, you design a space like a theater to echo, because when you make it echo, it creates self-consciousness. And when you hear your own voice, you lower your voice, right? So that's the design rule. But, I'm sitting there in the classroom saying, that sounds real sexy and good and all, but if a Haitian who doesn't have shame, we don't got that self-consciousness, walks into a room that echoes, you gonna hear some music. That's for dang sure, What's important to understand is that we are privileged and we are informing design, right? It's important for us, even me, like in my position to be working in these places, I have to understand that I can unconsciously impact how other people are living in other parts of the world. And it's really important to just start small changes to get to a point where you can start to really open up and understand beyond your limitations. I bet you guys didn't even know that research questions have their limitations. So even when you're being empathetic with the questions that you ask, right, you can be limiting yourself. For example, stoppers. When you ask somebody, wanna come to the bar with me after work? You would think like, oh, Nancy, I'm being friendly, I'm opening up my heart, you know? But you don't think that you're being presumptuous because maybe they're not drinking. Do you know how much calories are in alcohol? You know what I mean? Like you have no idea what someone's situation, so you want to rephrase it to be more curious, more open-minded, more inclusive. How do you unwind after work? Or maybe you started asking women every time you talk to them, do you have kids? Are you married? Do you find that you ask that? Maybe that's not the question you want to ask. You don't want to limit them and make it exclusive to that experience. Maybe you want to know what's important to them outside of work. Maybe you don't need to know about what school somebody went to. Maybe you need to know what's important to them, and as in the last 10 years of their lives. Do you see how you can take something that seems presumptuous, seems really innocent, and see it as a stopper where you can create it in a more empathetic, more curious, more open, more inclusive way? And so my hope today is to get you all to understand that when people in positions of privilege intentionally create solutions while accounting for their own unconscious bias, what that does is it consequently leads to inclusive design. Now you're creating for more people, you're including more people. So I'm gonna give you a last few tips that were helpful that I give to some UX teams, engineering teams, my product management folks, that I think are really quick tips to help you when you're working on product. One of them, test your learnings for marginalized communities in immediate or primary markets. What that easily means is, listen, when I'm working on a project at Mountain View, is that really gonna represent all of America? I remember I did a UX study, and it was with 7 people. 3 of the people were doctors. Not really great. So you know what I ended up doing? I went to Disneyland. Why? Happiest place in the world. Also has international people, it has representations of a lot of folks, right? Or maybe you should do your studies in Oakland where there's more diversity, or go to Las Vegas. Really think about am I running these studies in a place that creates accessibility for people outside of Salt Lake City, right? The next one is design a platform for participation ladder that provides more than 2 underrepresented checkpoints. What that means is purposefully include someone that's a little different in your studies. I remember when I was working on Uber Eats and we were doing this global project, people were shocked that I brought in a bunch of immigrants that didn't speak English. Now, mind you, I speak a couple languages, but we had all types of languages going on, all right? And they said, Nancy, what in the world are you doing? Why would you bring all these people here? And I said, well, who do you think is serving your food? Who do you think is selling your food? Right? We gotta understand what they seem to understand. And we were trying to understand from a loyalty project sense, right? If they knew that we have these programs where if you become a driver, did you know you guys get education and all these kinds of foods and snacks? So I asked everybody, what's that first line say? And they said, shun. A lot of them, majority. Shun was actually, the word was tuition. I don't know why we use such a difficult word like tuition. But did you know, if you're a courier for Uber Eats, that you get free tuition? So when I asked them, okay, what does this word mean? They told me it meant free food. Now, why did they say it meant free food? Because there was an image of an apple next to it. And we know an apple in America represents education. And so here's an opportunity for us to use design and art to create less limitation within language barriers. And that's what we learned there, that we could actually use illustrations to communicate with folks that have language barriers. But that all happened because we introduced a different type of person in the study. So always consider making sure that you have at least 2 underrepresented groups. Make sure you got women, make sure you have elders, make sure you have all kinds of folks if you can, so you can have a more robust study. The last couple things I'll say to you is that you wanna turn your assumptions into questions. This will save your marriage, this will save your life. I'm telling you, all right? Don't say, wash the dishes. Say, did you wash the dishes? Oh, you were busy with the kids. I hear you, By adding a question mark to your assumptions, you can change your life, okay? Change your life today. And the last one that's kind of obvious, if you got somebody that looks a little different, that actually gives you some perspectives that will increase the accessibility of your products. For me, for example, I've personally, on my own, been to over 90 countries, right? that level of experience has made it so interesting for the kind of work that I do to be able to capture issues. And being that I'm Haitian and Latina, it really drives a different perspective when I'm part of design teams. So I'm gonna end it here. I hope you guys learned some things, and I wanna thank you. My name is Nancy Douyon. I was the only Nancy Douyon in the world till my cousin married a Nancy. Damn. But we working on changing her last name. We're gonna fix that, okay? But for the most part, I claim all the Nancy Douyon. So if you're looking for me, you'll find me. I'm the black one. So thank you. I appreciate your time. I hope you guys learned something. And I can't wait for these questions.
All right. So we got a few questions for you here.
All right.
Thank you so much for that. First one is, how do you feel confident that you have considered all the appropriate perspectives in development?
You know, I don't necessarily think I feel confident that I've approached all the perspectives. I think it's about being intentional about seeing that you have perspectives that are missing, right? My goal when I work on these products isn't necessarily to change the world overnight, but to try to make the invisible seen just a little more, right? And so from my experience, I've done this for a long time, so there are a lot of factors I really think about. I think about socioeconomics, I think about ethnicities, I think about tribes. A lot of folks don't consider these things in their design, but when you start building around the world and you start launching things and making mistakes, boy, do you learn quick. I remember we did a project at Uber when I first started there. When they hired me at the time, they had said they had made a launch in India and they lost 30% of their customers in one day, because they forgot to consider that the size of their phones with the update, they couldn't handle it, right? And so here we are literally handing these customers off to other people because we didn't consider like how the internet works or how big the device is. But those are learnings that you then pull, you create your guidelines, and then you kind of carry on from there. But it's important, if anything, to try to do as much research as you can before you launch so that you're not calling me on some Olivia Pope scandal, please fix my life type situation. We burned everything down, yeah.
Awesome. What is your view on neurodiversity as part of inclusive design? How does that amplify with more traditional and unconscious bias that already exists?
I'm actually not sure what neurodiversity is. What is that? Could you explain it?
Sean, do you want to explain? Obviously,
Sean, where are you?
No,
You would think I would know all the words that have diversity in it.
Take it offline. Autism.
Oh, actually, that's really, really cool. So sorry, I do know that. We have done some work with that in accessibility sense, and we do take that into consideration. There are rules in accessibility to make sure that we're building things with some of that in mind. We consider color blindness. To be honest, the autism stuff is starting to happen. I've been having conversations about that space because a lot of folks are hiring a lot of autistic people to work on their products, but sometimes they don't consider how those products work on them. And I think there was a second part to that question. What was it?
How does that amplify with more traditional or unconscious biases that already exist? So,
How does that amplify with more unconscious biases that exist? Well, I mean, for sure, we don't take into consideration a lot of those things. It's probably the last thing people think about. I don't know if any of you guys have been in studies where you think, oh, maybe we should test this on like a person who can't see, you know, or things like that. But I will say that I have worked on targeted projects. I'll give you a great example, and how when you over-index on your studies with those underrepresented individuals, it actually opens up and shows access to people that you didn't even know that they had those limitations. So for example, I'll use Uber as an example because that's kind of relative to y'all. You may have used it before. Uber decided to do something for the folks who are hard of hearing. And so they would make the screen flash, and this was just like a good thing to do, like help the community out. What was interesting is when we studied who was turning on the I'm hard of hearing or deaf feature to drive, it was immigrants that were turning it on because of a language barrier. So here we are creating something for the people who are hard of hearing, but immigrants have an opportunity. You wanna know what was even more shocking than that? We found out regular people like you and me were turning on the feature because they didn't wanna talk to nobody. So now we found a way to create an opportunity for everyone, because guess what? A lot of people, man, you don't want to talk, so here's this thing that we designed for one, and it created more accessibility for all. And if you didn't know, things like Google Autocomplete and Google Voice, those were all accessibility projects too, and now it's something that we all enjoy.
Awesome.
All right?
Wonderful. A couple more questions. What is the most challenging projects related to design ethics that you've encountered?
Gosh, there's a lot. I would say, I'll give one example. You heard me kind of talk on stage about, the fact that there's some laws that actually make things really challenging for you because they deny the existence of isms, right? And so I was really surprised and shocked by the amount of, how colonialism really impacted how people see things. I was in foster care when I was younger, and I remember I would go back and forth from Haiti. And where I live in Haiti, we have a village where we don't use clocks. It's circadian rhythm, so roosters wake us up. The women all bathe together in the river. The men bathe together, and there's just patterns in our lives that are very different. And I would remember going to America and learning all these things about, breasts are bad, where they didn't sexualize them in my neighborhood. And so I'm going back and telling my grandmother to cover up those titties, and she's like, hey, nobody wants this? Nobody wants this, Nancy, what are you talking about, And so I think it's really interesting, back in the foster care example, I go back and they're telling me, Nancy, if you don't eat with the fork in your left hand, you can't have dinner. And I'm like, look, you don't even know why these etiquettes exist. It's not making me smarter, it's not making me better. My grandmother would come and visit America and she'd ask me, Nancy, where's all that green stuff? And I'm like, Grandma, they call it lawns? And she's like, well, what is it for? And I'm like, competition, showing off, I'm really sure it's an American thing. And she said, let me understand, Nancy, what you're saying to me is they can get the grass this green, but they won't make their own vegetables and fruits? That doesn't make any logical sense. And so I started seeing, there's so many aspects of culture that we don't even know why we have it. And if we're not introduced to other environments, we don't even question those things. So it's really, really challenging when sometimes I work with leaders who are so clear and sure that they know best for our community, and they tell me that I've been kicked off of projects because I've fought for a community. A small example, I won't name the company, we were trying to provide power to all of Kenya. Kenya at the time had 25% access to electricity. The other portion of Kenya, the 75%, about half of it was on a grid, right? And this particular company decided that they were going to give everyone in Kenya electricity. Sounds like a good hurrah, right? And so they asked me to come on the project and they said, listen, we need you to help us get $300 back from these Kenyans for giving them this infrastructure. And they said that they figured it out by the GDP that these families could afford about $100 a year. So in 3 years, they would pay for the infrastructure. And I said, you bugging, right? You are completely bugging, son. Let me tell you what I see as somebody who has lived without electricity and seen some other things, right? The first thing is, $300, you said we were on a grid, right? Have y'all ever stolen cable? No? Nobody here? No? Just me? Okay. Well, if you can steal electricity, and it costs 10 cents to get a wire connected. So if you're gonna go to an uneducated family and tell them it's gonna cost you $300, even while you're on the grid to get electricity, they're gonna call you to kick rocks, okay? And the other thing is, what happens? You just decided that GDP data was gonna tell me how much I could spend. You don't know what I'm paying for my kids. You don't know what I'm doing. So you're gonna take my farm? You're gonna take my whole livelihood? Because I'm gonna pay you this $300? The other thing is, where'd you even come up with that number? Sounds like corruption to me. You're gonna have to eat that. So you can only imagine, they're like, well, Nancy, you don't know what you're talking about. We're gonna help these people, and you clearly don't see what we see. We see it providing education. And I'm not telling you not to. I'm saying step back from this assumption that you're gonna save everybody and consider that maybe you need to do a little bit more research to understand how did these people live without you for so long? How is it that I can survive in communities without electricity and I'm alive? My God, how? No internet? But there are lots of societies that are living. It's really important that we communicate with these communities to understand why,
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. Let's
Thanks,
give
everybody.
Nancy another round of applause.